The raging floodwaters crashed against the barn walls as Beatrice Calloway clung to the wooden beam above her head, her wedding dress soaked and heavy, dragging her down into the murky water that had already risen past her waist. Just hours ago, she had been standing at the altar with the man her father had arranged for her to marry, a man who had abandoned her at the first sign of danger when the river overflowed its banks and threatened the small town of Willow Creek, Colorado. The year was 1879, and Beatrice had traveled all the way from Boston to marry a man she'd never met. Her father's business arrangement with the Thornton mining family had sealed her fate. When the flash flood warnings came, her groom-to-be Malcolm Thornton had simply said, "Save yourself," before mounting his horse and disappearing, leaving her to find shelter in the nearest building, a barn that was quickly becoming her watery grave. "Help!" Beatrice screamed, though her voice was drowned out by the thundering rain pounding against the roof. The beam she was holding onto creaked dangerously. The water continued to rise, and fear gripped her heart as she realized no one knew where she was. No one was coming for her. The barn door had been swept away by the current, and through the opening, she could see the devastation outside. The valley was transformed into a raging river, carrying debris and washing away everything in its path. Just as the water reached her chest and the beam began to splinter, Beatrice heard a splash and turned to see a tall figure wading through the water toward her. A man wearing a worn cowboy hat, his face determined as he fought against the current. "Hold on, miss," he called out, his deep voice somehow carrying over the storm. "I cannot hold much longer," Beatrice cried, her fingers slipping on the wet wood. The cowboy reached her just as her grip failed. Strong arms caught her before she plunged beneath the surface. Without hesitation, he lifted her against his chest, her sodden wedding dress weighing them both down. "I've got you," he assured her, his hazel eyes meeting hers for a brief moment before he turned and began making his way back through the water. Outside the barn, a horse waited nervously on higher ground. The cowboy carried Beatrice through the flood, his muscles straining with each step against the powerful current. When they finally reached the horse, he hoisted her onto the saddle before climbing up behind her. Looking down at the trembling woman in his arms, he called out to someone waiting on the ridge, "She's safe now." Beatrice looked up at her rescuer, raindrops streaming down his face, and in that moment, despite the chaos surrounding them, something shifted in her heart. "I'm Beatrice Calloway," she managed between chattering teeth. "Hunter Kincaid," he replied, urging his horse up the hill toward safety. "And I reckon this wasn't exactly the wedding day you had in mind." Hunter Kincaid guided his horse up the muddy slope, one arm securely around Beatrice's waist to keep her from slipping. The rain continued to pour, but they had escaped the worst of the flooding. At the top of the ridge stood a group of townspeople who had fled to higher ground, including Sheriff Daniels and the town doctor. "Good Lord, is that the Thornton bride?" someone called out as Hunter approached. "It is indeed," Hunter replied, his voice tight with anger. "Found her alone in Milner's barn, about to be swept away." "Anyone care to explain where her groom might be?" The crowd shuffled uncomfortably, and Beatrice felt her cheeks burn with humiliation. To be abandoned on her wedding day, only to be rescued like some helpless damsel, it was mortifying. "Malcolm Thornton rode out of town the moment the flood warning came in," Sheriff Daniels said, his weathered face grim. "Claimed he was going for help, but he was heading east, not west toward Silverton, where the nearest telegraph is." "He left me," Beatrice whispered, the reality of it settling over her like a cold blanket. "He simply said, 'Save yourself,' and rode away." Hunter's jaw tightened, but he said nothing as he dismounted and then reached up to help Beatrice down. Her legs buckled beneath her and he caught her before she fell. "Dr. Fellows," Hunter called, "this lady needs attention. She's been in that floodwater for who knows how long." A kindly older man with spectacles perched on his nose stepped forward. "Bring her to the church. We've set up there for those displaced by the flood." Hunter lifted Beatrice into his arms again, carrying her toward the white clapboard church that stood on the highest point in town. Despite her protests that she could walk, he insisted, and truthfully, she wasn't sure she could have made it on her own. Her limbs felt like lead, and a bone-deep chill had set in. Inside the church, women were bustling about, distributing blankets and serving hot coffee to bedraggled townsfolk. Mrs. Wilson, the preacher's wife, gasped when she saw Beatrice. "Heavens above, you poor thing, still in your wedding dress." She hurried over and began fussing, directing Hunter to set Beatrice down on a pew near the stove. "We need to get you out of these wet clothes immediately." "I'll leave you ladies to it," Hunter said, tipping his hat. "I need to help with the rescue efforts." "Wait," Beatrice reached out, catching his sleeve. "Thank you, Mr. Kincaid, you saved my life." His expression softened momentarily. "Just doing what any decent man would, Miss Calloway." With that, he turned and walked back into the rain, leaving Beatrice with a strange emptiness she couldn't explain. Mrs. Wilson and another woman helped Beatrice into the small room behind the pulpit, where they peeled off her ruined wedding dress. The silk and lace gown, which had cost more than a cowhand's yearly wages, was beyond salvaging. They dressed her in a simple cotton dress that was too large but blessedly dry, and wrapped a quilt around her shoulders. "You're lucky that Hunter found you," Mrs. Wilson said as she towel-dried Beatrice's long auburn hair. "He's got a sixth sense about folks in trouble, been that way since he was a boy." "Does he live in town?" Beatrice asked, trying to sound merely curious. "He runs the Lazy K Ranch about 5 miles outside Willow Creek, took over after his pa passed some years back." Mrs. Wilson smiled knowingly. "One of the most eligible bachelors in the county, though plenty have tried to change that status." Beatrice blushed and changed the subject. "What will happen now? With the flood, I mean." Mrs. Wilson's face grew serious. "We'll rebuild, as we always do. The question is, what will you do now, dear? I don't imagine you'll be marrying Malcolm Thornton after today's display of cowardice." The question struck Beatrice like a physical blow. What would she do now? She was alone in a town she barely knew, with no husband, no family nearby, and very little money of her own. "I suppose I'll wire my father in Boston," she said, though the thought filled her with dread. Her father had made it abundantly clear that this marriage was essential for saving the family's finances. His disappointment would be severe. "Well, no need to decide anything tonight," Mrs. Wilson patted her hand. "You can stay with Reverend Wilson and me until things get sorted." As night fell, the rain finally began to taper off. Volunteers returned from rescue missions, soaked and exhausted but reporting that everyone had been accounted for. Hunter was among the last to return, mud-splattered and weary. His eyes found Beatrice immediately, and he made his way over to where she sat near the stove. "You're looking better," he said, removing his hat. His dark hair was plastered to his forehead, and a small cut above his eyebrow had left a trail of dried blood down his temple. "You're injured." Beatrice reached up without thinking, her fingers stopping just short of touching his face. Hunter shrugged. "Just a scratch. How are you faring, Miss Calloway?" "Better, thanks to you." She offered him a small smile, "though I'm not sure what happens next." He studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Sometimes life has a way of changing our plans when we least expect it. "Hunter," Sheriff Daniels called from across the room, "need your help with these maps. We're planning recovery routes for tomorrow." With a nod to Beatrice, Hunter moved away to join the men gathering around a table where maps were spread out. She watched him go, struck by the way the other men deferred to him despite his younger age. There was something about him, a quiet authority, a steadiness that drew people in. That night, Beatrice slept fitfully on a church pew, the events of the day replaying in her mind. Her wedding day had turned into a nightmare, yet amidst the disaster, she had met a man who embodied everything her intended had not courage, selflessness, and honor. It was a confusing realization, one that left her both unsettled and strangely hopeful as she finally drifted off to sleep. The first light of dawn found Beatrice already awake, helping Mrs. Wilson and the other women prepare breakfast for the displaced townspeople. Her hands were unused to such work in Boston. She had never been expected to cook or clean, but there was something satisfying about being useful. Hunter arrived with several other men just as they were serving the food. They had been out since before sunrise, assessing damage and helping families return to homes that were still standing. His eyes found Beatrice immediately, a hint of surprise crossing his features at seeing her working in the makeshift kitchen. "Good morning, Miss Calloway," he said, accepting a plate from her. "I didn't expect to see you serving breakfast. I thought it best to make myself useful," she replied, "though I fear my biscuits are not quite up to Mrs. Wilson's standards." A small smile tugged at his lips. "I'm sure they're just fine." Their eyes held for a moment longer than necessary, and Beatrice felt a warmth creep into her cheeks. She quickly turned to serve the next person in line. After breakfast, Sheriff Daniels addressed the gathered townspeople. "Folks, the worst is over, but we've got a lot of work ahead. The river's receded enough that we can start getting back to homes on higher ground. Those of you with damage, make a list of what you need and we'll organize work parties." He paused, his gaze finding Beatrice. "Miss Calloway, a word if you please." Beatrice made her way to the sheriff, conscious of eyes following her. Hunter stood nearby, his expression guarded. "Madam, I've sent telegrams to surrounding towns looking for Malcolm Thornton," Sheriff Daniels said. "No sign of him yet, but my deputy says the Thornton house was emptied out yesterday before the flood hit. Appears he may have been planning to leave regardless." The news shouldn't have surprised her, yet it still felt like a blow. "I see. Your father has also been notified of the situation," the sheriff continued. "We received a reply this morning. He's arranged for funds to be wired to you and suggests you return to Boston on the next available train." Of course he had. Her father would want to minimize the scandal, bring her home, and likely try to arrange another advantageous match. The thought filled her with unexpected dread. "Thank you, Sheriff," she said quietly. "When can I expect the train to be running again?" "Tracks are washed out in several places," Hunter interjected. "Telegraph operator says it could be 2 weeks before they are repaired." 2 weeks. 2 weeks in this small town where everyone now knew her as the bride who'd been abandoned at the altar and nearly drowned in a barn. The humiliation was almost too much to bear. "Mrs. Wilson has kindly offered to let me stay with her and the Reverend until then," Beatrice said, squaring her shoulders. "And I would like to help with the recovery efforts in any way I can." Hunter's eyebrows rose slightly, but there was a glimmer of approval in his gaze. "We can use all the help we can get, no shortage of work to be done." "Then it's settled," Beatrice declared with more confidence than she felt. "I'll stay and help until the trains are running again." As the day progressed, Beatrice found herself assigned to help sort through donations of clothing and supplies that had begun arriving from neighboring towns. It was while she was organizing a pile of children's clothes that she overheard 2 women talking just outside the open church window. "Can you believe that Thornton fellow, leaving his bride like that?" one woman said. "I heard he took the mining company's money and ran," the other replied. "Poor girl traveled all the way from Boston for nothing." "Well, not nothing," the first woman laughed. "Did you see the way Hunter Kincaid looks at her? I haven't seen him pay that much attention to a woman since before Sarah died." "Hush now, that was years ago," her friend admonished. "Besides, she's a city girl. She'll be on the first train back east once the tracks are fixed." Beatrice's hands stilled. Who was Sarah? And was it true that Hunter paid special attention to her, or was it just town gossip? She didn't have long to wonder, as Hunter himself appeared in the doorway of the church, his tall frame silhouetted against the bright sunlight outside. "Miss Calloway," he called, walking toward her. "I'm heading out to check on some of the outlying homesteads. Sheriff thought you might want to come along, see a bit more of the area before you leave." Beatrice hesitated only briefly before nodding. "I would like that very much, Mr. Kincaid." "It's Hunter," he said, offering her a hand to help her up from where she knelt among the clothes. "If we're going to be working together, might as well use first names." "Then you must call me Beatrice," she replied, placing her hand in his. The simple touch sent an unexpected thrill through her, and from the slight widening of his eyes, she wondered if he felt it too. He released her hand quickly, clearing his throat. "My horse is outside. I hope you don't mind riding double. The other mounts are being used by the search parties." The prospect of sitting so close to him made her stomach flutter, but she nodded. "That will be fine." Mrs. Wilson appeared with a bundle. "Here's some food for your journey, and I've packed a spare dress for Beatrice. You never know what you might encounter out there." Outside, Hunter's horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion, waited patiently. Hunter secured the bundles to the saddle, then turned to help Beatrice mount. His hands at her waist were strong and sure as he lifted her effortlessly onto the horse. He swung up behind her a moment later, his chest warm against her back. "Hold on," he instructed, reaching around her to take the reins. As they rode out of town, Beatrice was acutely aware of his presence, the solid strength of him, the clean scent of soap beneath the earthy smell of leather and horse. They followed a path that led up into the foothills, the devastation from the flood evident in uprooted trees and debris scattered across the landscape. "It's beautiful country," Hunter said after they had ridden in silence for a while. "Different from Boston, I imagine." "Very different," Beatrice agreed, "but beautiful in its own way, wild and untamed." "That's what I love about it," Hunter replied. "Room to breathe, to be yourself without the constraints of society watching your every move. Is that why you live out here rather than in town?" He chuckled, the sound rumbling through his chest against her back. "Partly. Mostly it's because ranching is in my blood. My father built the Lazy K from nothing, and I aim to make it even better." "You must be very proud of what you've accomplished," Beatrice said, genuinely impressed by the passion in his voice. "Some days more than others," he admitted. "It's not an easy life, but it's a good one." They crested a hill, and Hunter reined in his horse. Below them stretched a valley, the damage from the flood clearly visible where the river had jumped its banks. But beyond that was a vista of incredible beauty, mountains rising in the distance, forests of pine, and meadows starting to bloom with wildflowers. "Oh," Beatrice breathed, taking it all in. "It's magnificent." "This is what I wanted to show you," Hunter said, his voice close to her ear. "There's more to Willow Creek than a flooded barn and a runaway groom." She turned slightly, finding his face inches from hers. "Thank you for showing me." For a moment, something flickered in his eyes, something warm and inviting that made her heart race. Then he straightened and clicked to the horse to continue on. They visited 3 homesteads that afternoon, checking on families and delivering supplies. Beatrice was struck by how Hunter was received with respect and genuine affection. He knew everyone by name, asked after specific concerns, and offered practical help rather than empty platitudes. At the 3rd homestead, an elderly couple named the Parkers insisted they stay for a meal. Mrs. Parker put Beatrice to work helping in the kitchen while Hunter and Mr. Parker repaired a fence damaged by the flood. "He's a good man, that Hunter Kincaid," Mrs. Parker said as they worked. "Been through his share of hardship, but it never soured him." Beatrice couldn't help her curiosity. "I heard someone mention a woman named Sarah." Mrs. Parker's hands stilled momentarily. "Ah, so you've heard about that. Sarah was his wife, died in childbirth 5 years ago along with their baby boy. Terrible tragedy." Beatrice's heart constricted. "I had no idea. He doesn't talk about it much," Mrs. Parker continued. "Threw himself into ranching afterward. Some thought he might drink himself to death like some men do after such a loss, but not Hunter. He's made of stronger stuff." Through the window, Beatrice could see Hunter working, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal muscular forearms as he hammered a post into place. Knowing what he had endured made her see him in a new light, his quiet strength, his kindness to others despite his own pain. As they rode back toward town in the late afternoon, the sun casting long shadows across the landscape, Beatrice found herself hoping the 2 weeks until the train resumed service would pass slowly. Very slowly indeed. That evening, back at the Wilsons' home, Beatrice sat at the small desk in the guest room and began a letter to her father. The words didn't come easily. How could she explain what had happened? That Malcolm Thornton had proven himself a coward and a thief. That despite the disaster of her wedding day, she wasn't entirely certain she wanted to return to Boston. She had just set down her pen in frustration when a knock came at the door. Mrs. Wilson poked her head in. "Beatrice, dear, you have a visitor downstairs." "Hunter Kincaid is here, says he has something that belongs to you." Her heart skipped as she quickly smoothed her hair and straightened her borrowed dress. "I'll be right down." Hunter stood in the Wilsons' modest parlor, hat in hand, looking somewhat out of place among the delicate furniture. When Beatrice entered, he looked up, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. "Beatrice," he said with a nod, "I apologize for calling so late." "Not at all," she replied. "Mrs. Wilson said you found something of mine." He reached into his vest pocket and withdrew a small item, holding it out to her. Found this caught on a fence post near the barn where I found you. Thought it might be important. In his palm lay a silver locket, her mother's locket, which she had worn on her wedding day. She had assumed it lost in the flood. My mother's locket, she whispered, taking it from him with trembling fingers. I thought it was gone forever. Thank you. Their fingers brushed during the exchange, and again that strange current passed between them. Hunter cleared his throat. It was no trouble. I noticed you wearing it when I carried you out. The memory hung between them, his strong arms lifting her from the rising waters, holding her against his chest as he declared, she's safe now. I never properly thanked you, Beatrice said softly. For saving my life. Anyone would have done the same, he replied, though they both knew that wasn't true. Malcolm Thornton certainly hadn't. Not anyone, she insisted. It takes a special kind of courage to wade into floodwaters for a stranger. Hunter's eyes held hers for a long moment. You weren't a stranger, not really. I'd seen you arrive in town the day before. Everyone was talking about the Boston bride. And now they're talking about the abandoned bride, she said with a rueful smile. They're talking about how you've pitched in to help since the flood, he corrected her. How you haven't complained once despite losing everything. I haven't lost everything, Beatrice said, glancing down at the locket in her hand. And perhaps what happened was for the best. Better to discover Malcolm's true character before the marriage than after. Hunter nodded slowly. You're a remarkable woman, Beatrice Calloway. The compliment warmed her from within. Will you be helping with the rebuilding efforts tomorrow? I will. The town's organizing work crews to start clearing debris and rebuilding the damaged structures. He hesitated, then added, I'd be honored if you'd join my crew. We could use someone with a good eye for detail. I'd like that very much, she replied, unable to keep the smile from her face. As Hunter bid her good night and departed, Beatrice clutched the locket to her chest. For the first time since arriving in Colorado, she felt a sense of purpose and perhaps the stirrings of something else, something she wasn't quite ready to name. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the kind of pristine Colorado day that made it hard to believe the destruction wrought by the flood just days earlier. Beatrice dressed in her simplest attire, a plain skirt and shirtwaist that Mrs. Wilson had altered for her, and pinned her hair up securely beneath a wide-brimmed hat to protect against the sun. When she arrived at the town square, work crews were already assembling. Hunter stood with a group of men, pointing to various locations on a map spread across a makeshift table. He looked up as she approached, and the smile that spread across his face made her heart flutter. Beatrice, he called, waving her over. Glad you could join us. The men with him tipped their hats respectfully, though she could see curiosity in their eyes. No doubt they wondered what a Boston society woman was doing volunteering for manual labor. Good morning, she greeted them. Where would you like me to help? Hunter introduced her to the men ranch hands from the Lazy K and neighboring properties, then explained their assignment. We're clearing debris from the mercantile today. Buildings still sound, but there's mud and water damage to contend with. The work was hard and dirty. By midday, Beatrice's hands were blistered, her back ached, and her clothes were filthy with mud. But each time she carried a damaged item outside or swept another section of flooring clear, she felt a sense of accomplishment unlike anything she'd experienced in Boston. During a brief break for water, she caught Hunter watching her from across the room, an unreadable expression on his face. What is it? She asked, suddenly self-conscious. Do I have mud on my face? He chuckled. You have mud everywhere, Miss Calloway, but that's not what I was thinking. Oh. What were you thinking, then? He took a step closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. I was thinking that you're not what I expected. Most Eastern ladies I've met would have fainted at the mere suggestion of this kind of work. Perhaps I'm not most Eastern ladies, she replied with a smile. No, he agreed, his eyes warming. You most certainly are not. The moment was broken by a shout from outside. They hurried to the door to find a rider approaching at speed. Hunter, the man called as he reined in his horse. They found Thornton. Beatrice felt her stomach drop. Hunter's expression hardened. Where, Silverton? Sheriff there has him in custody. Seems he tried to cash some bank drafts that didn't belong to him. The rider glanced at Beatrice. Begging your pardon, madam. "It's all right," she said, though her voice sounded distant to her own ears. "What happens now? Sheriff Daniels is riding out to bring him back," the man replied. "Said there'll be a trial for theft and fraud." Hunter turned to Beatrice, concern evident in his eyes. "Are you all right?" She nodded, though she felt anything but all right. The prospect of facing Malcolm again, of a public trial where her humiliation would be displayed for all to see, was overwhelming. "I need some air," she murmured, stepping past Hunter and walking quickly away from the mercantile. She made it to the edge of town before the tears came, hot and unexpected. She wasn't crying for Malcolm or the marriage that never was. She was crying for the public spectacle that would now ensue, for the letters she would have to write to her father explaining everything. "Beatrice." Hunter's voice came from behind her. She quickly wiped at her tears, embarrassed to be caught in such a state. "I'm fine," she said without turning around. "I just needed a moment." He moved to stand beside her, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains rather than on her face, a kindness she appreciated. "You don't have to be fine," he said quietly. "What Thornton did to you, to this town, it's unforgivable." "I barely knew him," she admitted. "Our fathers arranged the match. We'd exchanged letters, but only met in person the day before the wedding. I thought." She shook her head. "It doesn't matter what I thought, it matters," Hunter insisted, finally turning to look at her. "Your feelings matter, Beatrice." The sincerity in his voice broke something loose inside her. "I was so focused on doing my duty, on saving my family from financial ruin, that I never questioned whether I should marry a stranger. What kind of person does that make me a loyal daughter?" Hunter replied. "There's no shame in that." "But there is shame in being abandoned at the altar, in being the subject of town gossip and pity," she said bitterly. Hunter's hand came up to touch her cheek, gently turning her face toward his. "Anyone who pities you isn't seeing what I see." "And what do you see?" she whispered. "A woman of extraordinary courage and grace, someone who could have retreated into self-pity but instead chose to help others. Someone who faced disaster with more dignity than most men I know would have managed." His thumb brushed away a tear. "Someone I can't seem to stop thinking about." Beatrice's breath caught at the admission. Hunter's eyes darkened as he leaned slightly closer, then stopped himself, dropping his hand and stepping back. "Forgive me," he said. "That was inappropriate." "No," she found herself saying, "it wasn't inappropriate at all." For a moment, they simply looked at each other, something new and fragile growing in the space between them. Then Hunter offered his arm. "We should get back," he said. "But Beatrice, whatever happens with Thornton, you won't face it alone, I promise you that." She placed her hand on his arm, drawing strength from his solidity. "Thank you, Hunter." As they walked back toward town, Beatrice realized that for the first time since arriving in Colorado, she wasn't counting the days until she could leave. Instead, she was wondering what might give her reason to stay. The next few days passed in a blur of hard work. Beatrice threw herself into the rebuilding efforts, working alongside Hunter and his men from sunrise to sunset. Her soft hands grew calloused, her fair skin tanned from the Colorado sun, and to her surprise, she found herself enjoying the physical labor and sense of accomplishment that came with it. Word came that Sheriff Daniels was returning with Malcolm Thornton the following day. The news spread through town quickly, and Beatrice could feel the stares and whispers following her. That evening, as she helped Mrs. Wilson prepare dinner, the older woman broached the subject gently. "Are you prepared to see him again, dear?" Beatrice considered the question carefully. "I believe I am. The man I thought I was marrying never existed. I see that clearly now." Mrs. Wilson nodded approvingly. "You've changed since you arrived here, grown stronger." "I feel different," Beatrice admitted. "In Boston, my life was so prescribed. Every hour of my day was planned, every action scrutinized for propriety. Here, I'm judged by what I can contribute, by the work of my hands. And by the quality of your character," Mrs. Wilson added, "which has impressed a great many people, Hunter Kincaid chief among them." Beatrice felt her cheeks warm. "He's been very kind." "Kind, yes, but there's more than kindness in the way that man looks at you." Mrs. Wilson gave her a knowing smile. "I haven't seen him pay such attention to a woman since before his wife passed." "Mrs. Parker told me about Sarah," Beatrice said softly. "It must have been devastating for him." "It was. For a time we all worried for him, but Hunter has always had a resilient spirit. Mrs. Wilson paused in her work. Life out here requires it. The land takes, but it also gives. Sometimes what you lose makes way for something new to grow. Beatrice pondered those words later as she sat on the Wilsons' small porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. The beauty of this wild place had worked its way into her heart in ways she hadn't anticipated. A movement caught her eye, a rider approaching. Even at a distance, she recognized Hunter's straight-backed posture and the distinctive gait of his chestnut stallion. Her heart quickened as he drew closer and dismounted in front of the house. "Evening, Beatrice," he called, removing his hat as he approached the porch. "Hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all," she replied, gesturing to the empty chair beside her. "Please join me." He settled into the chair, his large frame making it seem small by comparison. For a moment they sat in comfortable silence, watching the last rays of sunlight disappear behind the mountains. "Sheriff Daniels will be bringing Thornton in tomorrow," Hunter said finally, "so I've heard." "You don't have to face him if you don't want to," he offered. "No one would think less of you." Beatrice turned to look at him, appreciating his concern but determined. "I need to face him, Hunter, for my own peace of mind," he nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Then I'll be there with you." "Thank you." She hesitated, then asked the question that had been on her mind. What will happen to him? Theft of that magnitude, probably prison, though his family might have enough influence to reduce the sentence. Hunter's jaw tightened. "He deserves worse, in my opinion." "For stealing the money or for leaving me in that barn?" Beatrice asked with a small smile, trying to lighten the mood. Hunter didn't smile back. "Both. A man who would abandon a woman to die doesn't deserve to call himself a man." The intensity in his voice sent a shiver through her. "Not all men are like him." "No," Hunter agreed, his eyes holding hers. "They're not." He reached over and took her hand, his calloused palm warm against her skin. The simple touch conveyed more than words could have: support, admiration, and something deeper that neither of them was ready to name. They sat like that, hand in hand, as stars began to appear in the darkening sky. No words were necessary in that peaceful moment, just the connection between them, growing stronger with each passing day. The following morning, a crowd had gathered outside the sheriff's office by the time Beatrice arrived with Reverend and Mrs. Wilson. Hunter was already there, and he made his way to her side immediately. "You don't have to do this," he reminded her quietly. "Yes, I do," she replied, squaring her shoulders. A murmur ran through the crowd as a wagon approached, Sheriff Daniels at the reins and a handcuffed Malcolm Thornton seated beside him. Beatrice felt Hunter tense beside her, his hand coming to rest supportively at the small of her back. The sheriff helped Thornton down from the wagon none too gently. Malcolm looked disheveled and tired, his once fine clothes dirty and rumpled. His eyes scanned the crowd and widened when they landed on Beatrice. "Beatrice," he called, taking a step toward her before the sheriff yanked him back by the arm. Hunter's hand pressed more firmly against her back, but Beatrice stood her ground as Sheriff Daniels led Malcolm toward the jailhouse. As they passed, Malcolm stopped, forcing the sheriff to halt as well. "Beatrice, you must help me," Malcolm pleaded, his voice desperate. "Tell them there's been a misunderstanding. The money was promised to me as part of our arrangement." The audacity of it to lie so blatantly, to assume she would help him after what he'd done, left her momentarily speechless. Then anger rose within her, clear and purifying. "The only misunderstanding, Mr. Thornton," she said evenly, "was my belief that you were a gentleman of character. I see now I was gravely mistaken." Malcolm's face flushed with anger. "You ungrateful, that's enough," Hunter interrupted, stepping forward. "You've said your piece, Thornton. Now move along before I forget there are ladies present." The threat in his voice was unmistakable. Malcolm's eyes darted between them, narrowing as he took in Hunter's protective stance beside Beatrice. "I see how it is," he sneered. "Didn't waste any time finding someone else, did you?" Before Beatrice could respond, Sheriff Daniels roughly pushed Malcolm toward the jailhouse door. "Inside, Thornton, you've caused enough trouble." As they disappeared inside, the crowd began to disperse, many casting sympathetic glances toward Beatrice. She stood rooted to the spot, Malcolm's accusation ringing in her ears. Don't let him get to you, Hunter said softly. He's just trying to shift blame. I know, she replied, but part of me wonders if people will think the same thing that I've been, improper in seeking your company. Hunter's expression grew serious. Anyone who knows you wouldn't think that for a second. And anyone who would judge you doesn't know you at all. His certainty comforted her, but the encounter had left her shaken. I think I'd like to go back to the Wilsons now. Of course. Hunter offered his arm, which she gratefully took. But if you're feeling up to it later, I'd like to show you something. Something that might help take your mind off today's unpleasantness. Curiosity piqued, Beatrice nodded. I'd like that. That afternoon, Hunter arrived at the Wilsons with his horse, and a second mounted gentle-looking mare with a white blaze down her face. Thought you might prefer your own horse this time, he explained as he helped her mount. They rode out of town, following a different path than before. Hunter led them up into the foothills, through stands of aspen trees where the leaves shimmered like gold coins in the afternoon light. After about an hour's ride, they crested a ridge and Hunter reined in his horse. There it is, he said, pointing to the valley below. Beatrice gasped at the sight. Nestled in the valley was a ranch not large, but well kept, with a sturdy main house, a barn, corrals, and several outbuildings. A stream ran along one side of the property, and cattle grazed in a meadow dotted with wildflowers. The Lazy K, Hunter said with pride evident in his voice. My home. It's beautiful, Beatrice breathed, taking in the peaceful scene. They rode down into the valley, and as they approached the ranch house, a dog came bounding out to greet them, barking joyfully. Hunter dismounted and helped Beatrice down from her horse before bending to greet the excited animal. This is Buck, he said as the dog sniffed curiously at Beatrice's skirts. Best cattle dog in the county and a terrible guard dog, as you can see. Beatrice laughed, reaching down to pet the animal, who immediately rolled over for a belly rub. He's wonderful. Hunter led her to the house, a solidly built two-story structure with a wide porch wrapped around the front. Inside was simpler than the homes Beatrice was accustomed to in Boston, but it had a warmth and character that immediately appealed to her. Well-crafted furniture, colorful woven rugs, and landscape paintings adorned the main room. My mother painted those, Hunter explained, noticing her admiring a particularly striking sunset scene. She taught me to appreciate beauty in all its forms. She was very talented, Beatrice said sincerely. Hunter moved to the fireplace, where photographs in simple frames lined the mantel. He picked one up and handed it to Beatrice. It showed a younger Hunter standing beside a pretty woman with a gentle smile. Sarah, he said quietly. Beatrice studied the photograph, noting the happiness in both their faces. She was lovely. She was, Hunter agreed, taking the photograph and carefully returning it to its place. We grew up together, married young, had big dreams for this place. I'm so sorry for your loss, Beatrice said, her heart aching for him. Hunter nodded, his expression somber but not bitter. For a long time after, I couldn't see a future beyond just getting through each day. But gradually, I realized Sarah wouldn't have wanted me to stop living. This ranch was our dream together, and carrying it on became my way of honoring her memory. The openness with which he shared his grief touched Beatrice deeply. In Boston society, such raw emotion would have been considered improper, kept hidden behind closed doors. But here, standing in the home he had built, Hunter allowed her to see his pain and his healing, a trust that felt more intimate than any physical touch. Thank you for sharing this with me, she said softly. He smiled, the sadness in his eyes giving way to warmth. I wanted you to see where I come from, who I am, no pretenses, no fancy trappings. I like who you are, Hunter Kincaid, Beatrice said, the words coming straight from her heart. Very much. The air between them seemed to still, charged with possibility. Hunter took a step closer, his eyes never leaving hers. Beatrice, he began, his voice rough with emotion. A sharp knock at the door interrupted whatever he had been about to say. Hunter sighed, reluctantly turning away to answer it. One of his ranch hands stood on the porch, looking apologetic. Sorry to bother you, boss, but we've got trouble with the north fence line. Some of Jenkins' cattle got through where the flood took down the posts. Hunter nodded. I'll be right there. He turned back to Beatrice. I'm sorry, ranch business. Of course, she replied, understanding but unable to hide her disappointment. Should we head back to town? Hunter hesitated. Actually, would you mind staying? I shouldn't be more than an hour. I could show you the rest of the ranch when I get back. The idea of spending more time here in this place that was so much a part of him appealed greatly. I'd like that. After Hunter left with the ranch hand, Beatrice explored the house, curious about the life he had built. The kitchen was well organized and surprisingly well equipped. A bookshelf in the sitting room held an eclectic collection, practical guides to ranching and animal husbandry alongside poetry collections and novels she recognized from her own reading. Upstairs, she found what must be Hunter's bedroom, simple but comfortable, with a large window offering a stunning view of the mountains. On the bedside table sat a book of poetry, a marker placed midway through. She smiled at the discovery, another layer to this complex man who continually surprised her. She was back downstairs, sitting on the porch with Buck beside her, when Hunter returned. The sight of him riding toward the house, silhouetted against the late afternoon sun, stirred something deep within her. He belonged here in this wild, beautiful place in a way she had never belonged anywhere. Everything sorted? She asked as he dismounted. For now, he replied, climbing the porch steps. Sorry to leave you on your own. I wasn't alone, she said, scratching Buck behind the ears, and I enjoyed exploring a bit. You have a lovely home. Hunter sat beside her on the porch swing, setting it in gentle motion. It's a good place. Gets lonely sometimes, though. The admission hung in the air between them, an opening she wasn't sure how to respond to. Instead, she asked, How many acres do you have? About 2,000, he replied. Not the biggest spread in the county, but good land. The stream never runs dry, even in drought years. And you run cattle, mostly, some horses too. He glanced at her, a smile playing at his lips. Why all the questions, Miss Calloway? Thinking of starting a ranch of your own, she laughed. Hardly. Though I must admit, there's an appeal to this life that I never would have understood before coming here. The freedom of it, Hunter nodded. Setting your own course, working with your hands, seeing the direct results of your labor. Yes, exactly, Beatrice agreed, surprised and pleased that he understood. In Boston, everything feels, removed somehow. Life happens at a distance, behind proper manners and social conventions. Hunter studied her, his expression thoughtful. You're different from how you were when you arrived. Am I? You're stronger, more certain, his voice lowered. More beautiful, though I wouldn't have thought that possible. Beatrice's breath caught at the compliment. Hunter, he leaned closer, his eyes dropping to her lips. Tell me to stop, Beatrice. Tell me I'm being too forward, that it's too soon after everything that's happened. But she couldn't tell him that, not when every fiber of her being was drawing her toward him. I don't want you to stop. With a groan, Hunter closed the distance between them, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that started gentle but quickly deepened as Beatrice responded. His hand came up to cradle her face, thumb brushing her cheek with a tenderness that made her heart ache. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing heavily. Hunter rested his forehead against hers, eyes closed as if savoring the moment. I've wanted to do that since I pulled you from that barn, he admitted, though I told myself it was madness. Perhaps a little madness is exactly what I need, Beatrice replied, her fingers tracing the strong line of his jaw. He captured her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. What happens when the trains start running again, Beatrice? Will you still go back to Boston? The question sobered her. Her father expected her return. Her life, everything she had known, waited for her there. Yet the thought of leaving this place, leaving Hunter, created a hollow feeling in her chest. I don't know, she answered honestly. A week ago, I would have said yes without hesitation. Now. I'm not so certain. Hunter nodded, not pressing for more. Whatever you decide, I want you to know these days with you have meant more to me than I can say. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, they sat together on the porch swing, hands intertwined, each lost in thoughts of what might be possible if Beatrice chose to stay. The day of Malcolm Thornton's preliminary hearing arrived a week later. The courthouse was packed with curious townspeople eager to witness the proceedings. Beatrice sat in the front row beside Mrs. Wilson, her back straight and her expression composed despite the whispers that followed her entrance. Hunter sat directly behind her, close enough that she could feel his reassuring presence. He had offered to testify about finding her abandoned in the barn if necessary, though Beatrice hoped it wouldn't come to that. The public humiliation of having the whole town hear about her wedding day disaster was almost too much to bear. Malcolm was led in by Sheriff Daniels, looking more kempt than he had upon his return, but still diminished from the polished figure who had greeted her upon her arrival in Willow Creek. He glanced in her direction, and Beatrice met his gaze steadily, refusing to show any weakness. The charges were red embezzlement, fraud, and abandonment of a person in danger during a natural disaster. This last charge had been added at Sheriff Daniels' insistence, and Beatrice suspected Hunter might have had something to do with it as well. To everyone's surprise, Malcolm pleaded guilty to the financial charges. His lawyer, a slick-looking man from Denver, explained that Mr. Thornton wished to make restitution and avoid a lengthy trial. The judge agreed to consider a reduced sentence in light of the plea, but insisted the abandonment charge would still require testimony. When Beatrice was called to the stand, she felt a moment of panic. Hunter caught her eye as she rose, giving her a nod of encouragement that steadied her nerves. She took the oath and sat in the witness chair, hands folded in her lap to hide their trembling. "Miss Calloway," the prosecutor began, "please tell the court what happened on the afternoon of May 17th. Taking a deep breath, Beatrice recounted the events clearly and factually. How the wedding ceremony had been interrupted by news of the rising river, how Malcolm had claimed he would seek help, how he had instead abandoned her, telling her to save yourself before riding away. "And how did you come to be in Milner's barn?" the prosecutor asked. "It was the nearest shelter as the waters rose," she replied. "I believed Mr. Thornton would return with help, but he never did." "And what happened then?" "The water continued to rise. I climbed onto a beam to stay above it, but it was breaking under my weight. I would have drowned if," she paused, glancing at Hunter, "if Mr. Kincaid hadn't found me and carried me to safety." Malcolm's lawyer rose for cross-examination, his expression sympathetic in a way that immediately put Beatrice on guard. "Miss Calloway, is it not possible that, in the confusion of the moment, you misunderstood Mr. Thornton's intentions? Perhaps he truly was seeking help but was prevented from returning by the flood itself." Beatrice's spine stiffened. "No, sir, that is not possible. Mr. Thornton was seen riding east, away from town, not towards Silverton where help could be found. And he took with him valuables and money, suggesting he had planned his departure well in advance." The lawyer changed tactics. "You traveled all the way from Boston to marry Mr. Thornton, a man you barely knew. Was this a love match, Miss Calloway, or a business arrangement between your families?" Whispers erupted in the courtroom. Hunter half rose from his seat, his expression thunderous, but Beatrice caught his eye with a small shake of her head. She could handle this. "Objection," the prosecutor called. "Relevance." "I'm establishing the nature of the relationship, Your Honor, which bears on Miss Calloway's potential bias," the defense lawyer argued. The judge considered, then nodded. "I'll allow it. The witness will answer." Beatrice lifted her chin. "It was an arranged match, yes. Our fathers had business interests in common." "So not a love match," the lawyer pressed, looking pleased. "In fact, you had only met Mr. Thornton in person the day before the wedding, is that correct?" "Yes." "And since the incident, you have been seen frequently in the company of Mr. Hunter Kincaid, have you not?" Gasps and murmurs filled the courtroom. Beatrice felt her cheeks flame, but she refused to be shamed. "Mr. Kincaid saved my life," she said firmly. "And he, along with many other citizens of Willow Creek, has shown me great kindness during a difficult time. If you are implying something improper, sir, I suggest you state it plainly so that I may address it directly." The lawyer backed down at her direct challenge. "No further questions, Your Honor." As Beatrice returned to her seat, she could feel Hunter's gaze on her, proud and supportive. The prosecutor called several more witnesses, including the telegraph operator who testified about Malcolm's suspicious money transfers, and Sheriff Daniels, who described finding Beatrice's possessions among the items Malcolm had taken. Finally, Hunter was called to testify about finding Beatrice in the barn. He described the scene in straightforward terms: the rising water, the dangerous conditions, and Beatrice's bravery throughout the ordeal. When asked why he had gone to that particular barn, his answer was simple. "I was checking all the low-lying buildings for anyone who might be trapped. When I approached Milner's barn, I heard a call for help." His eyes found Beatrice's in the crowd. "I'm grateful I arrived when I did." The trial concluded that afternoon. Malcolm was found guilty on all charges and sentenced to 5 years in the territorial prison, with the possibility of parole after 3 years if he made full financial restitution. As Malcolm was led away, he cast one final glance at Beatrice, not angry now, but resigned, perhaps even regretful. She felt no satisfaction in his punishment, only a sense of closure. The man she had traveled across the country to marry was a stranger to her and would remain so outside the courthouse. People dispersed quickly, eager to return to the ongoing work of rebuilding the town. Hunter waited for Beatrice at the bottom of the steps, hat in hand. "You were magnificent in there," he said when she reached him. "Dignity personified." "I was terrified," she admitted with a small laugh, "but I refused to let him or his lawyer make me feel ashamed." "There's nothing for you to be ashamed of," Hunter said firmly, offering her his arm. "Would you walk with me? There's something I'd like to discuss with you." They strolled toward the edge of town, where the rebuilt bridge now spanned the river. The water had receded to its normal level, peaceful now where it had been so destructive weeks before. "The train will be running again by the end of the week," Hunter said, stopping midway across the bridge. "Sheriff got word this morning." Beatrice's heart sank. She had known this day was coming, but hearing it stated so plainly made it real in a way it hadn't been before. "I see," she said quietly. Hunter turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Beatrice, I know we've only known each other a short time and under the strangest of circumstances. I know you have a life waiting for you in Boston and family expectations to consider." Hunter, he gently squeezed her hands. "Please let me finish. What I'm trying to say, not very well, is that I've fallen in love with you. I didn't expect it, and I certainly didn't plan it, but there it is. And I'm asking you, hoping, really, that you might consider staying here, with me." Beatrice's eyes widened. "Are you proposing?" A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Not exactly, not yet. That would be presumptuous of me, given everything you've been through. I'm just asking for a chance for us to have time to see if what's growing between us might become something permanent." Relief and joy flooded through her. "Oh, Hunter. I've been so afraid of this moment of having to choose between returning to Boston as my father expects and staying here where I've found you." "And what do you want, Beatrice?" he asked, his voice gentle. "Not what your father wants, not what anyone else expects. What do you want?" It was a question no one had ever asked her before. In Boston, a lady's wants were secondary to duty and propriety. But here, standing on a bridge that had been destroyed and rebuilt, facing a man who had seen her at her worst and still looked at her with such tenderness, Beatrice finally knew her own mind. "I want to stay," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I want to learn about ranching and this land. I want to be part of rebuilding this town. And most of all, I want to see where this journey with you might lead." The joy that spread across Hunter's face was like the sun breaking through clouds. He pulled her into his arms, lifting her off her feet in an exuberant embrace that made her laugh with delight. "I promise you won't regret it," he said as he set her down, his eyes shining. "I know I won't," she replied, reaching up to touch his face. "But I'll need to write to my father, explain my decision." Hunter nodded. "Of course, and if he wishes to visit to see for himself the life you're building here, he would be most welcome." "The life we're building," Beatrice corrected with a smile. Hunter's answering smile was tender as he leaned down to kiss her, a kiss full of promise and possibility. Standing there on the bridge, with the river flowing peacefully beneath them and the mountains rising majestically in the distance, Beatrice knew she had found something she hadn't even known she was seeking: not just love, but a place where she truly belonged. 3 months later, Beatrice stood on the porch of the Lazy K Ranch house, watching as Hunter worked with a young colt in the corral. The late summer sun gilded his features as he moved with quiet confidence, his voice a soothing murmur as he gentled the nervous animal. So much had changed since that fateful day when floodwaters had nearly claimed her life. Her father had responded to her letter with initial disbelief, then anger, and finally a reluctant acceptance of her decision to remain in Colorado. He had even sent her personal belongings, and to her surprise, a portion of her inheritance to help her establish herself in her new life. The town of Willow Creek had largely recovered from the flood, though scars remained. The newly rebuilt mercantile now carried several items from Boston that Beatrice had specifically requested: books, certain fabrics, and teas that had become popular among the town ladies who visited her regularly for what they jokingly called Eastern refinement lessons. In return, Beatrice had learned practical skills she'd never imagined mastering: how to ride astride rather than side saddle, how to manage household accounts, even how to bake bread and preserve fruits for the winter. Mrs. Wilson and the other town women had taken her under their wing, teaching her with patience and good humor. But the greatest change had been in her relationship with Hunter. What had begun in crisis had deepened into something profound: a partnership based on mutual respect, shared values, and a love that grew stronger with each passing day. She smiled as he looked up and caught her watching him. He said something to his ranch hand, then walked toward the house, removing his gloves as he approached. "Enjoying the view, Miss Calloway?" he teased, climbing the porch steps. "Very much, Mr. Kincaid," she replied, offering him a glass of lemonade she'd prepared earlier. He accepted it gratefully, drinking deeply before setting the glass aside. "How was your meeting with the school board?" "Productive," Beatrice replied with satisfaction. "They've agreed to let me establish a small library in the schoolhouse. Mrs. Wilson is already organizing a book drive." Hunter's eyes crinkled with pride. "You've made quite an impact on this town in a short time." "I'm simply trying to contribute in ways I'm qualified to help," she said modestly. "Besides, a good library benefits everyone." "Speaking of books," Hunter said, a hint of nervousness entering his voice, "I have something for you. Wait here." He disappeared into the house, returning moments later with a small package wrapped in brown paper. Beatrice accepted it curiously, carefully unwrapping it to reveal a beautiful leather-bound journal. "Open it," Hunter encouraged. Inside the front cover, he had written an inscription: "To Beatrice, whose courage and grace have brought light into my life. May these pages hold the story of our future together. With all my love, Hunter." Beneath the inscription was a small velvet pouch. With trembling fingers, Beatrice opened it and gasped as a ring slid into her palm, a delicate gold band set with a small but perfect diamond. "Hunter," she breathed, looking up to find him watching her intently. "I know I said I wouldn't presume," he said, taking her hands in his. "But these past months have only confirmed what I knew that day on the bridge. I love you, Beatrice Calloway, and I want to spend my life with you. Will you marry me?" Tears of joy filled her eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, with all my heart." Hunter slipped the ring onto her finger, then drew her into his arms for a kiss that held all the promise of their future together. As the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant hues of gold and crimson, Beatrice thought about the strange twist of fate that had brought her here. A flood that should have ended her life had instead led her to a new beginning. A failed wedding had opened the door to true love. And a cowboy who had lifted her from danger and declared she's safe now had given her not just safety, but a home, a purpose, and a love beyond anything she could have imagined. 1 year later, Beatrice stood in the bedroom of their expanded ranch house, watching through the window as Hunter showed their 4-month-old daughter the first snowfall of the season. Bundled against the cold, he held little Sarah carefully in his arms, his face alight with joy as he pointed to the gently falling flakes. Their wedding had been a joyous affair, held in the newly repaired church with the entire town in attendance. To Beatrice's surprise and delight, her father had traveled from Boston for the ceremony, finally meeting the man who had stolen his daughter's heart. Though initially skeptical, Edward Calloway had quickly warmed to Hunter's straightforward manner and obvious devotion to Beatrice. "He's nothing like I expected," her father had admitted the night before the wedding, but I can see that he makes you happy in a way I've never seen before." "He does," Beatrice had replied simply. "This place does. I've found my home, father." Life as a rancher's wife was challenging, but deeply satisfying. Beatrice had thrown herself into learning everything she could about the operation of the Lazy K, even riding out with Hunter when weather permitted. The ranch had prospered under their joint care, expanding its operations and hiring additional hands. Beatrice had also continued her work in town, establishing not just the library, but also a women's aid society that provided support to families in need. Her Eastern connections had proven valuable in securing funding and resources for the growing community. And then, just over a year after Hunter had pulled her from the flooded barn, their daughter had arrived named Sarah in honor of Hunter's first wife, a gesture of remembrance that had moved him to tears when Beatrice suggested it. "The past is part of who we are," she had told him. "I don't want to erase it or pretend it didn't exist." Now, watching him with their child, Beatrice felt a contentment she had never known was possible. The life she had once envisioned for herself as a society wife in Boston seemed like a distant dream, one that belonged to a different person entirely. Hunter looked up, catching sight of her in the window. With a smile, he brought their daughter back inside, stomping snow from his boots in the entryway. "Someone's excited about her first snow," he said, carefully unwrapping the baby from her blankets. "Weren't you, little one?" Sarah gurgled happily, her eyes the same hazel as her father's, bright with excitement. "She's going to be an adventurer, just like her father," Beatrice said, taking the baby and cradling her close. "And thoughtful like her mother," Hunter added, wrapping an arm around Beatrice's waist. "She'll have the best of both of us." Later that evening, after Sarah had been put to bed, Hunter and Beatrice sat before the fireplace, her head resting on his shoulder as they watched the flames dance. "Do you ever regret it?" Hunter asked suddenly. "Staying here, I mean. Giving up Boston society for this life?" Beatrice looked up at him, surprised. "Never, not for a single moment. Even when the roof leaks or the cattle get out or the winter feels like it will never end," he pressed. She laughed, reaching up to touch his face. "Even then, especially then. This life isn't always easy, but it's real in a way my life in Boston never was. And you." She trailed off, emotion making her voice catch. "You and Sarah are everything to me." Hunter turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "You know, when I carried you out of that barn, I had no idea I was carrying my future in my arms. And when you said she's safe now, you couldn't have known how true that would become," Beatrice replied softly. "I've never felt safer than I do with you, Hunter. Not just physically safe, but free to be who I truly am." He pulled her close, his lips finding hers in a kiss that still held the same spark as their first. When they broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Beatrice Kincaid. And I love you, Hunter Kincaid, now and always." Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing the ranch in pristine white, while inside, wrapped in each other's arms before the fire, Beatrice and Hunter Kincaid shared the warmth and love of the home they had built together, a home that had begun with a rescue, had grown through courage and commitment, and now thrived on the love that had blossomed in the most unexpected of circumstances. Spring came early to Willow Creek the following year. The meadows surrounding the Lazy K erupted in a riot of wildflowers, painting the landscape in vibrant purples, yellows, and blues. Little Sarah, now toddling on unsteady legs, delighted in the colorful blooms, squealing with joy as butterflies danced around her. Beatrice watched from the porch swing as Hunter chased their daughter through the yard, his deep laugh mingling with Sarah's high-pitched giggles. The sound filled her heart with such overwhelming love that tears sprang to her eyes. "Mama," Sarah called, breaking away from her father to run toward Beatrice, arms outstretched. Up, Beatrice scooped her daughter into her lap, pressing a kiss to her rosy cheek. "Are you having fun with Papa?" Sarah nodded enthusiastically, her auburn curls the same shade as Beatrice's, bouncing with the movement. "Papa fast. Too fast for you, little wildcat," Hunter said, joining them on the porch. He sat beside Beatrice, arm draping naturally across her shoulders. "Though I'm not sure how much longer that will be true. She gets quicker every day." She certainly does, Beatrice agreed, smoothing Sarah's hair. Mrs. Wilson says she's the most advanced child she's ever seen for her age. Hunter grinned with fatherly pride. Of course she is, she's a Kincaid. And a Calloway, Beatrice reminded him with a smile. The best of both, Hunter agreed, leaning over to kiss Beatrice's temple. Their peaceful moment was interrupted by the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Hunter stood, shading his eyes against the sun to identify the rider. "It's Tom," he said, recognizing one of their ranch hands. "Riding hard. Something must be wrong." Beatrice's stomach tightened with concern as she held Sarah closer. The young cowboy reined in his horse sharply at the front of the house, his expression urgent. "Boss," he called to Hunter, "there's trouble at the north pasture. Rustlers hit during the night. Took about 20 head from the looks of it." Hunter's face darkened. "Any sign of which way they went?" "Jake's tracking them now. Says they're headed toward the canyon." Hunter nodded grimly. "I'll saddle up. Get 3 more men and meet me at the stables in 10 minutes. As Tom rode off to follow orders, Hunter turned to Beatrice, his expression apologetic. "I have to go, I know," she said, rising with Sarah in her arms. "Be careful, Hunter. Cattle rustlers are desperate men." He cupped her face in his hand. "I will. We'll likely be gone overnight, possibly longer if the trail leads into the mountains." "We'll be fine," Beatrice assured him, though worry gnawed at her. Cattle rustling had become more common in the area as drought in neighboring counties drove some ranchers to desperation. "Just come back to us safely." Hunter kissed her goodbye, then pressed a kiss to Sarah's forehead. "Take care of your mama, little one. Papa go." Sarah asked, lower lip trembling. "Just for a little while, sweetheart," Hunter promised. "I'll be back before you know it." As he strode toward the stables, Beatrice fought down her fear. This was part of ranch life, the unexpected crises, the dangers that couldn't always be prevented. Hunter was capable and experienced, she reminded herself. He would be fine. But as she watched him ride away with his men, rifles at the ready, she couldn't shake the sense of foreboding that settled over her. The day passed slowly. Beatrice kept herself busy with Sarah and household tasks, but her eyes frequently strayed to the horizon, hoping for any sign of Hunter's return. When evening came with no word, she put Sarah to bed with stories of her brave papa, then sat on the porch with her mending, unable to sleep. Just before midnight, she heard hoofbeats approaching. Relief flooded through her as she hurried down the porch steps, a lantern in hand. But as the rider came into view, her heart sank. It was Jake, one of the older hands, riding alone. "Mrs. Kincaid," he called, dismounting stiffly. "Hunter sent me back to tell you not to worry. They've tracked the rustlers to an old mining camp in the hills. They're going to wait until dawn to move in." "Is it dangerous?" Beatrice asked, unable to keep the worry from her voice. Jake hesitated, then nodded. "Could be. There's at least 5 men in the rustling gang from what we could tell. But Hunter's got a good plan, and the sheriff's meeting them at first light with more men." "Thank you for letting me know," Beatrice said, trying to project a calm she didn't feel. "You must be exhausted. There's food in the kitchen if you're hungry." After Jake had eaten and retired to the bunkhouse, Beatrice returned to the porch, hugging her shawl around her shoulders against the night chill. Sleep would be impossible now, her mind filled with images of Hunter facing armed rustlers in some remote canyon. She must have dozed off in the porch chair, for she woke with a start as the first rays of dawn touched the eastern sky. Stiff and cold, she rose to go inside when the sound of horses approaching drew her attention. A group of riders appeared over the rise, moving slowly. Beatrice's heart lurched as she counted them. All the men who had left were returning, but one horse carried a slumped figure, supported by a rider behind him. "Hunter," she whispered, fear clutching at her throat as she ran toward them. As they drew closer, she could see it was indeed Hunter who was injured, his shirt darkened with blood on one side. Tom rode behind him, keeping him steady in the saddle. "Beatrice," Hunter called weakly when he saw her. "I'm all right, just a flesh wound." She reached them as Tom carefully helped Hunter dismount. He swayed on his feet, and Beatrice quickly moved to his uninjured side, supporting him as they walked slowly toward the house. "What happened?" she demanded, her voice tight with fear and relief. "Ambush," Hunter replied through gritted teeth. "One of them was hiding when we moved in, got off a shot before we could stop him. "The rustlers," Beatrice asked as they reached the porch. "All in custody," Tom assured her. "Sheriff's taking them to the county jail." "We got all the cattle back too, boss." Hunter nodded his approval, though his face was pale with pain. Inside the house, Beatrice helped him to their bedroom, carefully removing his bloodied shirt to reveal a gunshot wound to his right side. The bullet had passed through, leaving an entry and exit wound that, while bleeding profusely, didn't appear to have hit anything vital. With steady hands born of necessity, Beatrice cleaned and bandaged the wound, grateful for the medical knowledge she'd acquired since coming to Colorado. Hunter watched her work, his eyes never leaving her face. "You're taking this remarkably well," he observed. "The Boston Society lady I met 2 years ago would have fainted at the sight of so much blood." Beatrice managed a small smile despite her worry. "The Boston Society lady you met 2 years ago no longer exists. She's been replaced by a rancher's wife who knows that wounds happen and must be dealt with." "I'm sorry to have frightened you," Hunter said, wincing as she tightened the bandage. "You should be," she replied, her voice finally betraying her emotion. "When I saw you slumped over like that, I thought," she broke off, unable to voice her worst fear. Hunter reached for her hand, his grip firm despite his weakness. "It would take more than a cattle rustler's bullet to keep me from coming home to you and Sarah." Beatrice blinked back tears, squeezing his hand. "See that it stays that way, Hunter Kincaid. I've grown rather fond of having you around." His laugh turned into a grimace of pain. "Fond enough to fetch me some whiskey. This wound is mighty uncomfortable." "Fond enough for that, yes," she agreed, pressing a gentle kiss to his forehead before going to retrieve the bottle they kept for medicinal purposes. Over the next few days, Beatrice rarely left Hunter's side, tending his wound and ensuring he rested despite his protests that he needed to check on the ranch. The men, led by capable Jake, managed operations in Hunter's absence, reporting to him daily but handling most matters themselves. Sarah was confused by her father's confinement to bed, but delighted to have him available for stories and cuddles at all hours. She would sit beside him, her small hand patting his arm whenever he winced in pain, saying "Papa better" with such certainty that it became a family joke. A week after the shooting, Hunter was well enough to sit on the porch, watching as Beatrice worked in the garden she had established near the house. Sarah played nearby, carefully watering each plant with a small tin cup, more water ending up on her shoes than on the vegetables. "You've created something wonderful here," Hunter said, gesturing to the neat rows of plants. "When I built this house, I never imagined it surrounded by flowers and vegetables, with a child's laughter filling the air." Beatrice looked up from her weeding, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Are you saying you don't approve of my domestic improvements, Mr. Kincaid?" "On the contrary, Mrs. Kincaid," he replied with a smile. "I'm saying you've made this house into a true home, something I didn't know how to do on my own." Beatrice's expression softened as she set aside her gardening tools and joined him on the porch. "We did it together, Hunter, just as we do everything." He took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "When I was lying there in that canyon, bleeding and waiting for the men to secure the rustlers, I had time to think about how quickly life can change, how precious each moment is." "Hunter," Beatrice began, concern in her voice, but he continued. "I thought about you and Sarah, about the life we've built, and I realized something important." He looked directly into her eyes. "I've never regretted a single day since I carried you out of that flooded barn, not one." Tears welled in Beatrice's eyes. "Nor have I, even when I come home shot." He asked with a wry smile. "Even then," she replied, leaning in to kiss him softly. "Though I'd prefer it not become a habit." Hunter laughed, then grew serious again. "I want to expand the ranch, Beatrice, buy the Henderson property that borders our east pasture. It would give us better access to water and increase our grazing land significantly." Beatrice considered this. It would mean a substantial investment, but the Lazy K had prospered under their management. "If you think it's wise, I support the idea." "It would mean more work, more responsibility," Hunter warned, "but also more security for our future, for Sarah's future, and for any brothers or sisters who might join her someday." A slow smile spread across Beatrice's face. "About that?" Hunter's eyebrows rose. "Beatrice, I was waiting for the right moment to tell you, she said, her hand moving unconsciously to her stomach. Dr. Fellows confirmed it last week. We're going to have another baby sometime in the early winter. Joy transformed Hunter's features as he pulled her into a careful embrace, mindful of his healing wound. That's wonderful news. Why didn't you tell me sooner? You were a bit preoccupied with being shot, Beatrice reminded him with a laugh. It didn't seem the right time. Hunter placed his hand over hers on her still flat stomach, wonder in his eyes. Another child. Sarah will be thrilled to be a big sister. Speaking of Sarah, Beatrice said, glancing toward the garden where their daughter had abandoned her watering duties in favor of chasing a butterfly. She should know before anyone else. They called Sarah over, and Hunter lifted her onto his lap, ignoring the twinge from his wound. Together, they explained in simple terms that a new baby would be joining their family. Sarah's eyes widened with excitement. "Baby here?" she asked, pointing to Beatrice's stomach. "That's right, sweetheart," Beatrice confirmed. "The baby is growing in Mama's tummy just like you did." Sarah considered this information solemnly, then declared, "I help with baby, with all the authority a 2-year-old could muster." Hunter laughed, hugging his daughter close. "Yes, you will, little one. You'll be the best big sister in all of Colorado territory." As the small family sat together on the porch of the ranch house, surrounded by the land they loved and looking toward a future bright with promise, Beatrice reflected on the strange and wonderful journey that had brought her here. A journey that had begun in fear and disaster, but had led to a life richer and more fulfilling than anything she could have imagined. And it had all started with a flood, a barn, and a cowboy who had lifted her to safety and declared, "She's safe now." Words that had proven prophetic in ways neither of them could have foreseen. For in Hunter's arms, in the home and family they had created together, Beatrice had indeed found safety not just from physical danger, but the safety to be herself completely, to love wholeheartedly, and to build a life of meaning and purpose in this wild, beautiful land. As the sun began to set, painting the mountains in gold and crimson, Hunter squeezed her hand gently. "Happy Mrs. Kincaid." Beatrice looked at her husband, at their daughter, at the home they had built, and the land that stretched before them, their past, their present, and their future all contained in this perfect moment. "More than I ever dreamed possible," she replied, and knew it to be absolutely true.